Good evening, everyone, and welcome to Tech Tactics Live, episode 88. Tonight, we're talking about 968, a buyer's guide of sorts. Before we get started, I want to make sure we thank Pirelli, our sponsor. Without their support, none of this would happen. Of course, if you're watching and you enjoy the episode, we'd love it if you give us a like. Be sure to subscribe, and if you're watching live tonight, you can comment in the live chat area, and I'll be monitoring the chat area while we go through the episode tonight and hopefully answer those questions for you. We are just shy of 100,000 subscribers on PCA's YouTube channel, so anyone can subscribe and also contribute to that number, and we would really appreciate it. Tonight's guest, let's call him our 968 guru. He's the 968 Register Advocate, but he's also PCA's National Register Coordinator, Jeff Coe. Jeff, thanks for joining us.
Boom, glad to be here. Very fun.
Now, I know you've got a ton of information in that head, and you're about to explode on the scene, so to speak, and share with everyone about the 968. But let's share with our viewers what we're going to be talking about tonight. First, we're going to go into how did Porsche get to the 968? What are the model differences, the different models, what's it like? What's the experience of owning a 968? And then we're going to take a look at this beautiful example, black metallic 968 that our dear friend Bob Miller from At Speed Motors drove over for us to have an example that we can walk around and kind of share how Jeff looks at these cars when he sees them in the wild. So with that, you ready to rock and roll?
I am.
All right, so how did Porsche get to the 968? Because a lot of people will say it's sort of the best iteration of that platform.
Right. I think most people are familiar with the fact that the 968 is the final version of the very popular four-cylinder transaxle model from Porsche, starting with the 924 back in the late 70s, moving to the 944 in the 80s, which, as we know, is very, very popular. As the 80s were closing, Porsche was looking. They had a lot of ideas as far as what this next version of the car would be. They also knew, though, they had the Boxer in their sights. So they decided they were going to do one more version. The designers went to work. They came up with a bunch of different changes. And the interesting thing is, by the time they were done with all their changes, about 75% of the car, the 944, the outgoing 944, had been replaced with different components. So they figured, hey, 75%, we got a new model here. And that's what they did. The 968 was born after that.
So let's talk about the 90s, because at that time, Porsche, financially, the business model, I mean, that was tougher times for Porsche.
Well, we all know life is a lot about timing, and that certainly happened for the 968. As many of us know, the country and a lot of the globe went into a recession in the early 90s, and here we've got this beautiful new car, but it's very expensive. These cars came out, they were still $40,000. They were still largely hand-built at the time, and that resulted in the early 90s being a dry time for Porsche, not just for the 968, but the 911, the 928 as well. They were tough times, and so they didn't sell a lot.
So 924s, 944s, I think the majority of people will remember those cars sort of as the entry-level Porsche, but by the time the 968 came out, it was not as expensive as a 911, but I wouldn't say it was entry level.
But it still was Porsche's entry-level vehicle. The sticker on your 968 coupe, such as you saw here, was $39,850. It was actually slightly cheaper than the outgoing 944 S2 from '91. So they had lowered the price a little bit in order to help attract buyers. Not to mention you're getting this, a significant refresh.
And so, as a reference point, where was the 911 at that time?
The 911 was definitely, we in the high,
Even
60,000s, and then we've got the 928 even higher than that, in the 80,000s. But there were a lot of special versions of the 911 that were out in the early 90s, and those definitely had some, big price tags associated with them.
And you brought about the 928, and certainly there are cues of the 928 on the 968.
Yeah, when you look at the 968 here, you see a couple of cues. First off, no question about it, the 944 had the pop-up headlights, and you've got that continuing over here, except for now you can see the headlights. So now they're definitely more 928 reminiscent. The other big thing, though, is you'll notice that the fenders are raised. That's your 993 right there. So we've got that. And then there's obviously a lot of family resemblance with the 944. But we've got the wonderful aero mirrors that came out. They were introduced on the 968, the 17-inch cup wheels, the very trimmed rear end, and with the wing, resulted in a really sharp-looking vehicle.
A lot of people, when you refer to the 968, they comment on the power plant. That was fairly innovative for its time.
That's right. So first off, it was the largest four-cylinder at the time, and I think there's only one other car that made one at that time, even came close. It's a 3-liter four-cylinder, which is a big four-cylinder. But Porsche decided to launch the new variable cam technology with this car, which was a pretty slick system. And again, if you think about the 944 Turbo, which was outgoing, this car, it wasn't quite 247 horsepower that the 944 Turbo had, but without a turbo, with the 16-valve head and the variable cam technology, you've got 236 horsepower.
And the platform, people always talk about how well balanced these cars are.
And that was a carryover from the 924 and the 944. You're looking at a car with 50-50 weight ratio. That is probably one of the things that makes all of those cars shine, which is the 50-50 weight ratio and the handling that you can enjoy because of that.
And the years of production for 968?
So 968 only lasted for 4 years, 1992 to 1995, and they started production in September of '91 and went out of production to December of 1994.
Now, I was doing my homework and I came up, of course, the internet always tells you the truth.
Of course.
And I had mentioned that there's roughly about a production level of 13,000 968 units, but you were very quick to correct me on that
yes,
one.
Yes. Robert, if you can pull up our production stats. I did a sheet here for which outlines exactly the number of production. You can see Porsche uses a VIN series so that you can determine what you're looking at. You can see all the numbers there. We've got the rest of world coupes, the rest of world club sports or CSs, the North American coupes, North American cabriolets, our rest of world cabriolets, and then the very few turbo cars, resulting in 11,605 made over that short 4-year period, which is pretty small.
It is. So can I ask you, without divulging your sources, how do you come up and know that these numbers?
Many, many years of study.
Yeah, and
yes.
You've been in this for almost since the time the cars were introduced, right?
That's right. I bought my first 968 in 1996, and I joined the PCA 968 Register I joined PCA in '93. The Register programs were started in the early '90s, so I joined them and I became the historian and really latched on to the production details of the cars. So I've been collecting production data over all these years. And again, like you said, a lot of stuff on the internet is wrong, but when you go to the source like PCA, you can get it right. And so that's what you're looking at.
Let's talk about not only the 968 Register, but also the registries in general, for those that are watching that might not be familiar with them.
Okay. In addition to being the advocate for the PCA 968 Register, I'm also the Register coordinator. The Registers are a program that PCA put together in the mid-90s. they are groups of uber enthusiasts for particular types of Porsches. So we have currently about 20 different registry groups for various types of Porsches, and we have an advocate for each one of those. And that's where the people that are really into their particular model of cars get into. And like I said, I've been a member of the 968 registry for 20 plus years. And again, I've met so many really uber enthusiasts about the cars who really are into them and, have multiple versions, multiple cars, and really enjoy them.
And they're a great resource. I know if I was ever shopping for a 968, you would be my first phone call because, and we're going to share some of that later,
Yep.
is just like any Porsche, you want to get into the correct Porsche. And there's some things that you should look for, things that you should look out for, and we'll share some of that tonight. But let's talk about the different models. I mean, we say 968, but through the years, there are different models.
Right. Well, I was going to touch on a couple of the different aspects of the 968. Robert, if you could put up slide 2. A couple of the interesting things I touched on briefly. All the 968s were built in Stuttgart alongside the 911s and 928s. The 944s were built elsewhere. So a lot of people didn't know that. I already mentioned the production time range when they were made, September 91 through December 94. There are the amazing thing. In the 4 years, just the 4 years that the 968 was produced, they were offered in 33 different exterior colors. Just
33, just in 4 years.
Just in 4 years. And hold on to your hat. 98 different interiors over 4 years.
So if you're looking for a rare Porsche, if you buy a 968, more than likely it's going to be one of a very low number.
Well, I'd like to tell you that, but unfortunately, a lot of people just bought the same thing. But that doesn't mean you didn't have the options.
Right.
That's what was available. And, and that speaks to the fact of why the car was so expensive. Again, Porsche was so dedicated at the time to have all those offerings, all those different interiors. And that's the reason why you see those numbers. A couple other oddballs I was going to mention. Most of the coupes have sunroofs, but you can still see you can see that only 6 of them in the U.S. were not equipped with sunroof, though it makes them unusual. Next up is the MO30 Sport chassis package. That's something that's very desirable. This particular car we're going to see tonight is equipped such a way. They only made 99 of those. Let's see. Then we've got a sport seats, definitely a desirable option, and then also Porsche was just getting into the exclusive options back then. Special leathers, wood options, piping on the seats, all deviated carpets, all those things. You could buy all that stuff for the car. Not a lot of people took advantage of that, but they definitely offered it back in the day. Next up, we were going to talk about model year changes. All right, so we can go to slide 3 now, Robert. So the interesting thing about the 968 is there really wasn't any significant changes to the car over the 4-year run. I mean, the most interesting thing is the motor on that first 92 is pretty much the same motor on that last 95. 236 horsepower. I guess it testifies to how good a motor it was, but they didn't really change it. Of all those cars I just showed you the production of, the only ones that had anything different were the turbo models, and there was only 17 of those. But everybody else got the same motor. That said, there were minor changes along the way, and I picked out 5 of them here, which I wanted to share with the audience tonight. The first one, number 1 there, is the limited slip differential. When the 968 was launched in 1992, the limited slip differential was made by ZF. By 93, they moved to the Torsen model.
And the reason why you would want limited slip, or how does it feel driving a car with versus without?
Well, obviously you're getting traction from both rear tires, so again, something that's a very popular option across the board. People always like traction, so that's a good option. Number 2 is the air conditioning refrigerant. In 1992 only, you will find the R12, but Porsche converted all of their model lines to the R134A in 1993. So everything after that is the R134A, which is much easier to find.
Can I quickly ask
Sure.
if you're buying an earlier car that has R12, is the conversion to 134A pretty known and well
yes, and it's
documented?
easy to do.
Easy to do.
R12 is super expensive even if you wanted to buy it.
Right.
So yes, you would want to do that.
Okay.
So number 3 is the wheels. You can see everybody's familiar with the Cup 1 design on the left and the Cup 2 design on the right. The early cars, 92 through 93, have the Cup 1s and into the 94 model year. And then the Cup 2s, which tonight's model car is going to show us, have the Cup 2 wheels. Change number 4, the bucket seat design. The bucket seats were largely a carryover from the 944 for the early cars, 92, 93, and into 94. They went with what we refer to as the 993 Comfort Series on the later cars. And this car we're going to see tonight has that. That was also another change that was made. And then finally, one that I'm asked about a lot, Porsche really cared about the engine compartment presentation on the 968. It's one of the best looking engine compartments that they made on any of their cars. The early cars had these extra trim pieces. You can see the one on the upper left hand corner there. It's got a little glove box where you would find a pair of gloves as well as a rag so that you can put the gloves on and check your oil and then return them to the little glove box.
Nice and organized.
Yes.
Yeah,
and then there's another trim piece in the back, but it results in a very nice looking engine compartment. Well, and Porsche people like cleanliness. They like things well sorted. So that's what the early cars have that. However, another thing that didn't survive that mid-year 1994 change was those trim pieces. You can see the car on the bottom. The pictures of that are without those pieces. And that is, in this car here we're going to see tonight, does not have those. People like to add them. It's a popular retrofit item, but that is... Is
there something in the VIN or the codes that would show that the car should have it or should not have it?
Yes, we have a hard number where
there's a hard number. Oh,
yes.
Okay.
Go to 968register.org and you can find out where it is.
That's the kind of trivia that Porsche people love, right?
So that is the 5 most significant changes that I wanted to present tonight. But I have one more that I wanted to bring along. It's the last page of slide 2 there, Robert. And that is what I consider the most interesting change, and we were discussing this one before. Today, when you see a modern Macan or a Cayenne, you'll notice the nice Porsche hood crest that we all are in crest in front of the car that we've all noticed and we've all seen on our cars through the years. Well, they had that, of course, in the 968. The car here we are looking at has it. But the first few hundred cars in 1992 came with a recessed hood badge. And what that means is Porsche went to the trouble of stamping the hood, steel hood, to recess the badge so that it's sunken into the hood. And only the first couple of hundred cars have these through probably November of 1991. And then they said, forget it, and they went with a flat one.
I suspect that was extra cost to do that.
Yes, you can imagine doing it on steel must have been much more difficult than today's plastics. A lot of the bumpers and stuff are just made out of plastic. But it makes for an interesting tidbit as far as our 968s go. So if you ever come across that, you're looking at an early 968.
So you mentioned the pieces, the glove box or the trim pieces under the engine earlier,
right.
How people like to retrofit it. Are they finding those pieces from salvage cars, or can you actually,
yes.
or you can,
pretty much.
Can you order those new?
You could.
Okay, you can.
And I'm not positive whether or not they're still available. But typically, those pieces are well protected. So if you've got a car, a 92 or a 93 that's been, no longer with us, easily you can find that. And like I said, people like the way it cleans up the engine compartment, and they put that in there.
So with a car that was made, in my mind, fairly few years, and if you get into one, how hard is it to find the parts for it, should you need it?
Okay, so they're getting harder. We contact Porsche, and the parts are definitely getting more challenging. For major maintenance parts are still available. You can get the belts, the rollers for the cams, things like that. But some of the interior trim, things like the bigger pieces and stuff, a lot of that stuff is gone now. So again, we're looking at used cars and of course we have Porsche Classic, and we we do make an appeal to them. One of the things that's recently gone out and no longer available is the tensioner for the Porsche 968. It's a part that doesn't always go, but when it goes, you need one. And but that's gone, no longer available. So there has been petitions to Porsche Classic to put that back into production, and that for other cars they have gone back and redone certain parts.
I mean, they're pumping out, like, I believe 300 new parts a year.
Right.
So they do look at the list, and if there's stuff like that you knew you need, should get it in front of Porsche
Right.
Classic, because they do keep tabs of
Right.
how many people are asking, and if obviously there's enough demand for it, they're going to put it back into production.
Yeah, and unfortunately, that's the hard part with the 968.
The-
With
the
only
number of people.
11,600 being sold,
Yeah.
we need a part. They're compared to that 944, or some of the more popular 911. So, but that said, they're usually pretty good about listening, and hopefully we'll see that tensioner again in the future.
So talk about like cross model parts. Like, of course, we talked about the 968 influence, and I look at the light. Is that light the same as the 968 or no? Like the motor and like,
You remember I told you up front the car's 75% new parts.
Yeah.
So there's very few things on here that you could find on a 944.
But a 928? No.
You know who uses that?
Who used that one?
That 911, the flat bow.
With the
that's the same. That has 960, but it took it from the 968, not the other way around.
Not the other way around. Oh.
And that's a cool looking car. But
Yeah.
you can see the family resemblance.
Absolutely.
That's those lights. Yeah, the emblem's the same. But a lot of. But again, these cars are 75% new. The sunroof panel, that's the same. There's definitely a few 944 parts in there, but there's a lot of unique stuff here, and so that means we're shopping used cars or hoping we can find it new someplace.
So I have to ask you, and I know this is a kind of a loaded question because you're the 968 registrar, but when someone's considering a 944 S2, which is very similar, I mean, what tips you over the edge to say go 968 versus 944 S2?
Well, now you're going to put me against my 944 brethren here. I don't really
That's
like
why I
it.
asked you
We're
the question.
family members.
I asked you the question.
I know, we're family members here. We don't like to squabble within the family. Now, this is an evolution car. There are definitely, and the 944 guys aren't going to dispute that. I mean, there's definitely a number of things that are addressed here. This car's got a 6-speed. This car's got a solid bulletproof motor. These are great machines. I mean, I've owned them since 1996. They really do hold up well. I love the 944s. I myself started on the 944. But there's definitely improvements in this car over the 944. And even from a looks perspective, and again, that's subjective.
Yeah.
But you take one of these to a Porsche show, and people always like they're very unique, and people like the looks. But I love 944s too, so don't forget that. So
here's a question for you from Pelican Wing.
Okay.
When was the switch from 2+2 seating to the rear shelf in the cab, and why?
Okay. So all North American 968 cabriolets have the shelf, every one of them. They did it for a very good reason. In 1993, the federal government was going to mandate 3-point lap belts, and for the
rear.
For the rear.
Ah, okay.
So for the rear belts that you would find on a 944 cabriolet, they just had the lap belt. So they did not want to invest the money into making a 3-point belt so their stopgap solution for that was to come back with that double glove box shelving unit that they put in there. Now, what's interesting to note is the North American 968 cabriolets that went to Canada, they kept the rear seats. Because they didn't have that law, so they were able to keep and they're like a jumper seat. They're really not good for much other than children.
Right.
I don't think you could put an adult back there.
No, at least not
but
for a long period of time.
But every one of the North American cabriolets have those shelving units.
You mentioned an interesting factoid about how the cabriolets are made earlier at dinner.
Right. They were made by American Sunroof Corporation out in Germany. The body started life as a coupe, and then they were cut and converted into cabs. They were reinforced with the body, and then they had a lot of that's carryover from the 944 Cabriolet, the roof design, and then the framing that they used on the tops and things like that. That all came over from the 944 cab.
Speaking of coming over, the numbers that you mentioned, how does that translate, like rest of world 968?
Okay, they're there, and on that sheet that I showed before, The 968 sold slightly better ROW than they did in North America. So there's a few more out there. Some of the more interesting ones are also ROW. And the other thing, and I'll touch on this a little while, but as we were talking about earlier, the ROW cars are making their way to the U.S. now because the cars are over 25 years old.
Are there any significant differences in like power?
Nothing significant when we talk 968s. There's some interesting things. You'll find that little light on the fenders.
The marker light.
Yes. Rear fog lights. There are definitely right-hand drive vehicles for some markets, UK, Australia. One of my favorite ones is 1992 only. The French 968s had yellow fog lights.
Ooh, that's kind of cool.
It definitely is cool. And then just a lot of other very minor differences. But again, for the most part, a lot of the cars are primarily the same.
So after how many 968s have you gone through in your 968 career?
10.
10.
I currently have 3.
So maybe you could share with our viewers, what's life like driving a 968? Owning one.
There again, I've enjoyed all my time with my cars. From a maintenance perspective, the powertrain, like I said, being the final evolution, the thing's pretty well set up. It is not uncommon to find a 968 with over 150,000 miles. People do drive them, so they do hold together very well. The big thing for 968s is doing that belt replacement. The timing belt and the balance shaft belts should be done every 5 years without change. This car has a interference design head, which means that if that belt was to break,
things hit.
That's right, things hit, and that's never a good thing. And the expense of repairing that would be much larger than it would be to just do the belts every 5 years.
And how much is a belt service?
The belt service is about $50. You can see this on slide 4. $1,500 to $2,500.
Oh, that's not bad.
Nope. Now, another interesting, 944s were noted for having water pump issues. They had kind of figured that out by the time the 968 came along. So if you're not having any specific problem with your water pump, don't replace it. I just had the timing belt replacement done on my cab, which has 66,000 miles, and the original water pump passed inspection is in there. It's still going to this day. So you don't have to replace that water pump like maybe on a 944 you might want to do.
Speaking of 944s, I know I've heard like rod bearings and stuff like that as something to consider.
Nothing to worry about on these cars.
On a 968, that's not an issue?
No.
Oh.
Then another thing I'll say is these cars are fairly easy to work on. I do a lot of my own maintenance. Brakes are fairly straightforward. Diagnosing any kind of issues, definitely general maintenance like tune-ups and things like that. That's definitely pretty straightforward. Fluid changes. You've got your oil filter right there. You got to get those belly pans off, but other than that, it's pretty straightforward. Another thing I was going to mention: the only arch nemesis that struck the 968 a long time ago was a pinion bearing issue. Now, this was an interesting problem that came out when the car was new. And this is what I'm told. One of the machines that put the pinion bearings together back in the factory would put too much load on it, and because of that, it would force the transmission transaxle to have problems later on in life. You'd get the bearings wearing out and hear a lot of whine. So that was a fairly significant expense. I would say at this point, though, any car that's going to have that issue has been figured out, and you don't have to worry about it. But it definitely was its IMS bearing of the 968. IMS issue for like the 996 has. That was the 968's issue.
Now, how would you know the car has that issue?
A whining. You would hear a bearing like noise coming from the transaxle.
And based on speed, or
yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Other things I just mentioned here that people might consider that you want. The DME relay, which is the fuel pump relay, that'll go once in a while. I have friends.
Have a spare in the glove box, right?
Yes, I have a friend that does that. Heater control valve is another weak spot, but I don't know if I've ever lost one. And the clutch slave cylinder, that's another one. I've lost 2 of those in my time. But other than that, like I said, the cars are real solid. I mentioned that they over 100,000 miles, you might want to consider doing the cam pad replacements. And then just to mention, everybody always likes wheels on their cars. When the 968 was new, 16-inch wheels were standard, 17-inch were optional, and you can get away with an 18-inch. Those turbo cars from the factory had 18-inch wheels on them at the time.
Okay. Can you answer this question for M. Becker? What was unique about the 968 Club Sport?
Okay, so the 968 Club Sport, or CS, as my friend Jake it taught me, is that it was an idea that Porsche came out with to energize sales of the 968 in Europe. And basically it was a stripped down version of the 968. They took all kinds of things out to reduce weight, took all the power accessories, all that, the cushiness out of the car. You're talking manual, in its base configuration, manual windows, the wire looms were removed, even you were mentioning the trunk latch, no alarms, things like that. They took all of that stuff out. Not only did it reduce the weight of the car significantly, but it also reduced the price of the car. So it was a great framework. They added the hard back bucket seats, which were standard equipment on the car, and that you could get the MO30 sport suspension, and you could really make a formidable track car, or the beginnings of one, with those cars.
But the powertrain on that car was the same?
Exactly
the same. So just lighter weight.
Right. And those cars were only sold in Europe, 93, 94, and 95.
Okay. And let's go to the even more rare ones, the 968 Turbo S.
So those were two, the S and the RS were two factory racing attempts. And basically the S was a turbocharged version of the 968. What they did was, the unusual thing about it is they couldn't get the turbo to work right with the 16-valve variable cam technology. So they ended up pulling it off and putting the old 8-valve head back on. But that said, they were able to get 300 horsepower out of the Turbo S. But they only made 14 of them. And so they're extremely rare. They're the cream of the crop. If you notice from my first slide there, they had their own VIN series. And so they're super rare. And then they took it up.
This one was 240-ish horsepower?
Yeah, right, 236.
236. The Turbo S about 305.
That's correct.
And this next one you're talking about is like 350.
Right. And that would be the RS. They only made 3 of those. And that was definitely more of a race car. And I think that has the title of being the rarest RS vehicle produced by Porsche. 3.
Wow.
So, yeah, super rare.
Okay. So anything else you want to share about the ownership experience of the 968 before we actually do a little walk around on this car?
I'll make a couple of closing comments when we're done. But, yeah, let's go ahead and take a look at our model here tonight.
Okay. All right. So hopefully we'll get this. I'm going to bring my phone in case people have questions about the car. So this is, again, thank you to Bob Miller and At Speed.
Yeah, thanks, Bob.
For bringing the car over. So take it away. What are we looking at?
So this is a great example. I was thrilled to be able to come down and review this car. I had the VIN. And one of the things that's most interesting, Boo, is that because 968s are so rare to begin with, it's not hard to get, as you chop the numbers down and look at different features and specifics, it's not too hard to get it down to a super rare car.
Yeah.
So let's take this one for instance. This is a 1995 coupe, and very nice car, and it's painted in a somewhat unusual metallic black color. If you were here today to look at this color, you would see that there's actually gold flake in the black paint. And so in person, it almost gives it almost a little bit of a brown, goldish type of hue to it. But it's very, very pretty. Well, as I mentioned, you saw on my first slide, they made 1,234 North American 968 coupes. This is one of them. Now, as we know, there was 2 transmissions available on the 968. There was the 6-speed and the Tiptronic. The Tiptronic, it was expensive, and although it worked, it wasn't particularly performance. It didn't do great from a performance perspective. So obviously, these are driver cars. So the bulk of them, of those 2,234, 1,811 were manuals. Now, this car has a very unusual option. It has the MO30 sport suspension package. There are only 99 of those were produced, and this car is one of them.
And MO30 consists shocks, stabilizer bars?
Correct. Sway bars, shocks. It's got 928 GTS brakes, and so it made for much more of a road holding
Different
performance
springs?
suspension.
Different springs as well?
It's in the shocks and
Yeah.
stuff like that.
Okay.
Yeah. So the thing about the MO30 though is if you read articles back in the day about cars with the MO30, it delivered fantastic performance in the track environment, but it was very punishing on your daily driving.
Daily commute.
So it's much more. You're going to get much more feedback on this suspension than you would on a regular 968. But that said, it's really cool that this car has that. Again, one of 99. Now, I mentioned the color is pretty unusual. Of those 2,000 968 coupes, only 41 of them were painted in this black metallic color.
Whoa.
So that makes it pretty rare. And then, of course, when you combine those two attributes together, the black metallic and the MO30 suspension, you're looking at one of two.
Wow.
Yep.
You got down to single numbers pretty quickly.
Exactly. And that's not hard to do with a 968. I mean, again, there were so few to begin with, so it's not hard to take them and dice them up that way to get them down to a small number like that.
You talked about the manual transmission on this car and how it's one of 18, 11 or so.
Right.
So I guess my question to you is, Tiptronic was introduced in this car as well.
Right.
How does that affect the value? How does that affect the drive?
It definitely hurts the value.
It hurts the value.
That said, there are a few people that need a Tiptronic for whatever reasons they don't want to shift.
Yeah.
So that's okay with them. But from a performance perspective, it definitely hurt the value of the car, or the performance of the car back in the day. This car would do 0 to 60 in 6 seconds back when it was new. The same car equipped to the Tiptronic, 8 seconds for 0 to 60.
Very different from today's
Oh my
PDK,
gosh, yes.
where PDKs are faster than manual.
Exactly.
Back then it was the opposite.
And that's the, people always refer to these cars as analog cars. And
Yeah.
that's exactly what they are. Same thing with that suspension. I have my modern car, I can adjust the suspension like that. I can go from super comfortable to super performance, just like hitting a button. Not with this car. This car, you had to make a choice. Do I want that MO3 suspension? Yes, but I'm going to pay for it all the time.
Okay. Here's a question for you before you go continue on this one. Is from Jeff Hammond. You mentioned that the tensioners are available. Where do you get them?
Oh, no, I said they're not available.
They're not available.
Right, they've gone NOS now.
So now what do you do?
Well, again, we're approaching Porsche Classic to say if they can redo that. Your only choice today, though, if you are, it's a good part to begin with. You usually don't have to replace it. But if you do, you're looking for somebody that's part of
a salvage.
Part of the motor, right.
Okay.
But the good news about it is, again, even on a parted motor, you're probably there's a good chance the tensioner will be okay.
Okay.
All right.
Good. All right, keep going.
So on this car here, again, this is Bob's car. So the question is, what would I look for when I was looking at this car if I was going to buy it? Well, one of the first things I look for is the dash. The dashboards are plastic, and they're very susceptible to the sun. And so when you see these cars, if you see a warped or a cracked dash, it's lived somewhat of a hard life.
This dash looks perfect.
It looks perfect.
Yeah.
So this car has not lived a hard life.
Yeah.
So that's one of the things I look for right away. One thing that is another thing that's common though, I did notice on Bob's car, and he's only owned it for a little while, so he's going to take care of these things now that we've talked about it. These gaskets around the doors, just after a matter of time, they start to deteriorate. And this car is, going on 30 years. This car is 30 years old, or going to be 30 years old next year. They go, these are available new. They don't cost a lot of money. It's not a hard job to replace them. But this is to be expected. You're going to see stuff.
A car
like
of this age.
Yeah, and this wouldn't faze me in the slightest. I see this and I say, wow, this car is so original. It's got the original gaskets. Then we're going to look down here. The rubber seal trim moldings that go along here. You could see this one starting to come out. Again, they get, over time, they start to shrink. So, again, very cheap to replace these. They are not expensive. You get yourself some nice fresh ones, and you'd be fine. Looking at this car again, another thing you always want to look for, and this is with any Porsche, what's the condition of the bolsters on the seats? We've got nice, aged, soft leather here. Looks great. The whole interior of this car, you'll notice these are those comfort seats that I was referring to, the 993 comfort seats. They're real nice and in great shape. This car is just pristine.
So Jeff, are those the same exact seats as a 993? So let's say you had a bad driver's seat. Could you take a 993 seat and replace and be the same?
Tracks might be different, but the seat's the same.
Seat's the same. Okay, gotcha.
Another thing I wanted to point out here, one thing I always look for is when I'm looking at a 968, is the position of the font of the 968 emblem in the rear. Whenever one of these has paintwork, they never put them back correctly. So what you're looking at there is the correct positioning of the emblems. If you see the 6 and the 9 are off or whatever, you'll know that something's gone on over here. And so seeing this just tells me, again, just points to more of the originality of this car and how it's in nice shape. Another thing that's common with these cars, and even this carries over from the 944 if you get a car that's older, is delamination of the hatch, where the glass actually starts to come apart from the frame. This one looks beautiful, but again, something to look for. You want to open and close the hatch, and if you see any kind of moving going on there, or even if you were to wash the car, you see some evidence of water coming through there, you got a problem. It can be fixed. But it's definitely something to consider, and it is a common problem with the 944s and the 968s.
What about the seals and the water tightness for those hatches?
They're fine.
Okay.
That's not typically any kind of problem. Glad to see Bob sporting a 968 Register fling here. Nice job, Bob. Let me show you around the front here now, Box. This car, as part of the MO30 suspension package, came with the 17-inch wheels. With the 968 and the 928, you're going to find a 7.5-inch wheel. You'll notice that the size of the wheel is actually right here. It's right 7.5. That is the correct wheel for this particular car. The 911 used a 7-inch. So a lot of times people will, if you want to go with the larger wheels, you take a double check and make sure that nobody's you can run a 7-inch, but the correct wheel is a 7.5 in the front.
Okay.
They both use 9s in the rear.
Okay.
Since
we're talking in that sort of general area, we have a question from Sean Sharp. Can you retrofit MO30 to cars that didn't come with
yes,
MO30?
you can. You just got to find the components, which are not that is not easy to do. But if you could find all the components, you absolutely could.
Okay.
All right.
Yeah.
You'll notice this car. We can't compare it, but that's the much larger, well, not much larger, larger calipers from the 928 GTS. And you'll also notice the cross-drilled rotors, and those are forged. In other words, so those will not develop cracks. And so that's, again, part of the suspension, part of that suspension package. Another thing, Vu, I think you might find interesting, and maybe the audience would too. People back in the day, one might have thought that limited slip would be included in the MO30 support suspension package. It was not.
It's a separate checkbox. Or was a separate checkbox.
So because of that, of the 99 cars, 22 of them didn't have limited slip. And we don't know for sure, but we are highly suspicious that, the dealers might have thought that it came with it. Because why would you buy such a performance-oriented
and not get limited slip?
Right. And the interesting thing is, over on ROW, we talked about the club sports. If you've got the MO30, mandatory 220 limited slip. Another thing to note is these are bumperettes. This is unique to the North American cars. This is our safety features here. We got them in the back too. These have a tendency to rot sometimes. These are beautiful, but you can buy these new and easily replace them.
These tend to fall out.
Right. Well, and then this to part two. It's also a common thing. A lot of the guys hate these. So if you can find a ROW car, you can get the light here, the turn signal light that comes all the way around here and covers that spot. But that's the way ROW was, and not for the North American. Another thing you're going to want to check is make sure your pop-up headlights work well. Bob and I tested his earlier, and they did work very nicely. You want to make sure that they come up and go down. Just like the human body, you want to make sure those things are exercised so that they don't get stuck, because every once in a while you'll see a one-eyed 968 or 928, and you want to have that taken care of. But overall, this is a beautiful example here of a 968, and Bob's got a great car here, and definitely a beautiful one, and one of two.
Can we take a look at under the hood and
kind
of show people what you look for? I'll let you do it.
No?
And all 968s came with the rear spoiler and wiper?
Correct. That was part of the U.S. North American spec. It's interesting as I look at cars from all different parts of the world. What was standard for some markets and what was standard for others. It's interesting to see all the differences, and we touched on it.
Oh, that glove box did make it look so much tidier, huh?
And then there was a piece along the back here. You note there's the VIN for the car right there. That's the chassis number right there on the side, on the back there. And then here's our beautiful inline 3-liter 16-valve variable valve cam timing. You can see the little emblem here that tells us 236 horsepower. We've got everything nice and easy to work with. You've got your brake and clutch cylinder over there. You got your power steering here, the coolant's right there. You can see your oil filters right here. So again, fairly easy to work on and very nicely presented engine compartment. I mean, you can see everything. So one of the sad things we miss today in today's cars is you don't really get to see the presentation aspect, and this car definitely delivers in that respect.
Now, it seems like this engine bay has quite a bit of room. We have a question from Hazel Green. Are there, I would assume, aftermarket kits to introduce a supercharger or turbocharger for these cars?
Supercharging is more popular. They're harder to find now. No, I don't think anybody makes them new anymore. You can find kits that are left over from a few years ago. And it seemed like supercharging went a little better than on these cars than turbocharging. The problem though is, again, you start to develop up here, then you got to worry about back there, and you got to worry
get
about
the brakes.
Right. So I would suggest drive the car as is. If you're considering one of these things, go out. They really do perform nicely, and and get a feel for it, and then you decide, do you really need a supercharger? But
do these motors have a sort of a common oil leak or common area that needs to be addressed?
No, I mean, all engines can have some kind of issue, but there's no
common, like,
that's right. There's no weak spot. Nope, they're all fairly good as far as that goes. And just like any Porsche, you're going to want to keep up on the maintenance, but the car will reward you with solid performance. Like I said, one of the best things about this car being the final evolution is they really looked at all of the issues that they had beforehand.
Can you share with our viewers
this
piece right here and what you noticed earlier?
Now, Bob's going to be mad.
Bob's going to be mad at us.
All right,
but that's okay. Well, at Bob's expense.
I came up a few hours ago and I inspected the car, and when Bob popped the hood, the first thing I saw was what probably us 968 gang would refer to as one of the saddest things we often see, which is the cruise control cable dangling over the top of the fuel rail. And that's all we've seen this before, and it's always like an indication that somebody worked on the car.
Someone's been in there.
and didn't know, what to do, because Porsche's gone through the trouble of, look at this, they make this beautiful little notch for the cable to run through. They're so worried about the engine presentation, and here you put the part back together and you forget to run the cable through it. So Bob's car was like that, so I pointed it out to him right away. So he made sure he fixed that before he came over here and let us use the car there tonight.
That's the beauty.
Bob, it wasn't my idea to bring that story up. That was
But that's the beauty of being part of the 968 Register and being with folks that really know the cars, because little details like that make a difference. Let's make our way back, because I'm sure a lot of people are wondering. So now you've got me interested in this model. What are we looking at? Today's pricing, the market, where are these cars?
Okay, so Bob was asking me about that. A nice 968 coupe, like you're looking at here, this car has about 58,000 miles. And there's your bring a trailer results. A car like this will bring, a regular 968 coupe will probably bring around $30,000. Not one like this.
Not this one.
This one's got some
one of two. So
right. So a nice, well-sorted, ready to go 968 coupe will bring that kind of money. Then you add in, but then you go up from there. This one's got the MO3 suspension option. So that's definitely, that's going to bring it right up. And so that's going to add about at least 10 grand onto the car. And then the color and the production details as far as, the color being one of two. So you're looking at this car here, I would say.
Kind of keep stacking.
That's right. So this car here would be worth around 50-ish, maybe a little better than that. But a 968 that's just one for enjoyable, you can get one for around 20. If you want a project, you're going to spend 10 or 15. Now, some of the ones that are really expensive are the cars that are, that have super low mileage, or the colors. Colors are definitely, just like with any old Porsche. Everybody bought red, white, and black back in the day. And so when you see one in Riviera blue or mint green or something like that, that's going to command a significant premium because of that color. I mean, you could double the value of the car. Same exact car, if that car was, Riviera blue, it'd be worth twice the money.
So this, we always say in PCA Porsche world, like, if you're into this car, buy the best example that your budget will allow, right? So I know that's what you should do. But I will say that, my son, who's 19, he's been to all sorts of PCA events, Porsche parade, and, the last parade that he went to, he showed me all these photos of 944s, 968s, and I'm thinking, could I get him something that's maybe 15, 20, and then work on it? Or should I just tell him to, like, save his piggy bank and get the nicer car?
I mentioned the fact that these cars are fun to work on. And so that's without question. You just want to get one that's not too far gone, because you don't want to just have one thing after another. So, but there's no question about it. You want a project, you want to, these cars are enjoyable cars, not just to drive, but also to work on. I work on mine, and I have a good time doing it.
Being a 90s car, is rust an issue, or by now rust is not an issue?
No, they had really sorted out the rust. I guess there are some places like the CS, as you mentioned, they didn't use as much corrosion protection on them. So I've seen some rust over in Europe that I was really surprised. These cars are really nicely protected from the factory, so they usually corrosion is not an issue.
Okay, we have a question here from Sean Sharp. We've already said how many cars are pretty darn rare, but what are the rarest of rare colors for 968?
Okay, so again, it all depends on the market. Like I said, for North America, white, red, and black were the colors to choose. So any of the wild colors are super rare. That would be Maritime Blue, Riviera Blue, Mint Green, Speed Yellow, Amaretto Violet, and they're so rare. I think I mentioned to you before, if you went looking for a Signal Green 968, you're not going to find one, because they didn't sell a single one here in North America.
It was available, just no one checked the box.
Right. That said, there is a lot more. The Germans were a lot more interesting when it came to buying cars. There are definitely some cool cars over in Europe. We have a friend, Eric, who up in Massachusetts. He's been buying some of the more choice 968s and bringing them over here to North America. He's got a great taste when it comes to colors and has brought some really interesting ones.
Is that
here.
because of the 25-year rule? And
yes.
It's easier.
Yep. They're historic display cars, and now they're easy to do that. So, yeah, so I had some points. We'll go to my final slide, slide 6, on buying a 968, Robert. So again, yes, you want that project, you can get that project. But if you do want a nicer one, you want to look for a clean example. And if you can find one with PCA history, us PCAers, we take good care of our cars.
Absolutely.
So if you wanted one that you wanted just to get in and enjoy, going on the mart, finding a good one there, it would be great. You want that maintenance history, especially that timing belt. You want to know when was the last time that was done. If you're looking at a car that hasn't had it done for 5 years, then
or if you don't know, just do it.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Some people are so nervous when they don't have that information. The first thing you do is flatbed the car to the shop to have the new timing belt. Because again, kiss of death if it goes.
Now, there isn't a way to inspect the timing belt without fully doing the job?
But you could inspect it, but again...
If you're going to go that far, you might as well just
No, but you wouldn't be able to tell.
Oh, really?
Yeah, I mean, it could be, years. It's starting the car and running it. If the car had stopped non-started for 5 years, the belt might look mint. But again, it hasn't been stretched or moved in 5 years. It's susceptible to going. And
because
again,
it's an interference engine, it's just something
you don't want to take
you
the
don't
chance.
Want to take the chance.
Yep.
Got it.
Maintenance history, like I said, the supporting documentation. If you got things like the window sticker or the manuals, that's all good. I mentioned that clean dash. You want to look for that. There's a toolkit in the back next to the spare tire. You're going to want to look for that. Make sure that's there. Porsche did a really beautiful job with the manuals back in the early 90s. You remember the leather case.
Yep.
It was the same for the 911s and 928s as well. 968 has that as well. You want to make sure that's there with all the manuals. The cabriolet top, is it still functioning? Sometimes people turn them off because they don't want it to break or whatever. To me, you want to see that top still functioning.
So they were all power tops?
That's right. Every one of them.
But if it's not power now, it's because someone disconnected.
Right.
Okay.
And you don't know what that means.
Right.
Something could have broke or whatever. So, again, the majority are 6-speeds. Of the North American ones, your 3258 are manuals, 984 are tips. Again, if you want a rare color, you've got to be prepared to pony up. You're going to pay for that because they definitely bring a premium. That MO30 suspension package like this car has, very cool, very rare, but know what it means. You're going to be enjoying that firm suspension 24/7. And again, as I mentioned before, the ROW examples are making their way to the US. They're for sale sometimes, or if you find one out in Germany that you like, you could bring one over. But again, in summary, I think the 968 is a fantastic car as far as the driving experience. Panorama did an article a few years ago where it was called the last of the analog cars, and they got a 968 and a 993 and a Boxster, and they took them out and because this was the mid 90s.
Right.
The cars had enjoyed a lot of improvements. You've got your air conditioning, you've got your airbags, you got your ABS, you got a 6-speed, you got your 50-50 weight ratio, but the car still forces you to engage with it and gives you that enjoyable experience. And that's one of the things I like best about the 968 is just rowing that 6-speed and being able to have fun with it.
And that's what's great about the 90s era cars is, they have that analog experience, but yet they have the modern conveniences the basic essentials for modern conveniences.
Exactly. Yeah, I think I told you I have an old car at home, an old Dodge Challenger, and driving that is certainly analog, but not in a good way.
Right.
This car is again very much an enjoyable car that you could drive to the store to pick up something, or to on your favorite road and just hug those turns and stuff like that. So that's what makes them so much fun.
I know you're super handy DIYer, but what if someone wants to get into a car like this that they don't happen to be handy with tools?
Right.
Where do you take a car like this to get worked on?
Now it's getting harder and harder, as with any older car. There used to be tons of these, and so now you're looking for techs that have the experience, but you're going to have to search. The information has been given to others, so you can find mechanics that do know how to work on these. The timing belt, just doing that timing belt replacement, it has to be tensioned and everything else, and you need to know how to do that. Some guys do that themselves. I don't do that job, but some people do, and so you have to find a mechanic that knows the older cars.
So over the years, have you acquired any kind of special tools to be able to work on the 968?
I have, and others have even more. I mean, there's a couple of tools that some of the guys who are really into the car. I know one of the things they like a lot is the Bosch hammer tool, which is, this is OBD2, I believe.
So that's the computer of back
right.
then.
Yeah, and it's very, very crude compared to today's. But it's still, you read codes and can reset things. This car has airbags and everything else. See, that's some of the more into guys that do more mechanical work have those. They have the tools to do the timing belt replacement. The ones I have, basically, I do a lot of brake work and stuff, so I have my regular tools, but you're going to want to have a 19mm socket to get those lugs off. I have the special oil filter wrench.
That fits the cap perfectly.
Fits the cap. And then the other thing is you want to have a insert for the jack. The
jack point.
Right. So there's the 4 spots, and I use that all the time. So that's really the extent of my special tools that I have for the car.
Now, this car being 90s era, emissions is certainly a part of it. Is there anything special about maintenance of the emissions or anything?
No, not really. There is a catalytic converter.
Yeah.
And but I live in Connecticut, and I no longer have to take my car for any kind of emissions testing or whatever. But they run clean. They get great gas mileage too. I mean, you'll get in low 20s around town. About 20 miles per gallon, and on a straight highway trip, if you put this thing in 6th gear, going to parade in Birmingham, you'll get close to 30 miles per gallon, which is nice, and it's still good amount of performance as well.
Well, that's a great segue to wrapping this up, because I told you an hour would fly by, and it certainly did. talking about Porsche Parade June 9th through 15th. Today we actually opened the second phase of Porsche Parade. So if you haven't registered yet, or if you've registered for phase 1, you want to finish up your registration for Parade, go ahead and do that soon. We have Treffin at Sea. We're all heading to Alaska the end of July and beginning of August. We have over 820 folks already booked. So a bucket list item, much like Parade. Join us. If your car's put away, and spring is around the corner for us here, but many of us have our cars tucked away. So if you want to go racing with fellow PCA friends, check out PCA Sim Racing. If you haven't caught up on the PCA podcast, we definitely encourage you to do that. We had a kind of a funny one for April Fool's Day, so check that out, podcast at pca.org. And our newsletters, I don't know if Robert, hopefully you have them. We have e-brake news, Mart Fresh news, and performance news. If you don't get those in your inbox, you can get them by simply going to pca.org/newsletter-sign up, and you can sign up for those. Again, if you've enjoyed this episode or other episodes on PCA's YouTube channel, we certainly would appreciate the thumbs up. We always read the comments, and of course, be sure to subscribe. And with that, we want to thank you for joining us on Tech Tactics Live, episode 88. Jeff, appreciate it.
Nice,
for those
Will.
of you that are interested in 968 or you own one, the register, we've got information, the details, and help you make the right decision when you go buy your own. Take care, everyone.